Bre-X, a household name for quite a while in Canada. Bre-X, the biggest gold mining scandal ever. Not just in Canada, ever. And of course, I fell down many rabbit holes. There are many rabbit holes that I wanted to go further down, but let's just try to stick to the overall picture. But I should be trying to focus on material misstatements. This is really supposed to be about financial statement fraud and things in that vicinity. But definitely, it bears going over the scandal in general, just to remind people maybe, hey, there's people out there in YouTube land that may not have heard of it. It was a mineral mining company, what you call a junior mining company in Canada, incorporated in 1989, but it became infamous in the 90s for orchestrating one of the largest, no, I'd say the largest mining fraud in history, centered on supposedly massive gold deposits in Busang, which is on Borneo, which is a island in Indonesia. It was initially Bre-X itself. The company was initially only listed on the Alberta Stock Exchange for pennies. It was a penny stock. It was worth 30 cents in the early days. And it went up eventually to like $300, I think. It was insane. There was stock splits, all the rest of it. So a very general timeline here. In 93, they acquired the site in Busang. I mean, they were incorporated in 1989 by David Walsh. They get the site in Busang. They claim those gold reserves are there in the mid-90s. Independent testing reveals the gold samples were salted in 1997. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I couldn't help but fall down that rabbit hole a little bit. It's an interesting way of falsifying mining prospects. Aftermath, the company collapsed and $6 billion Canadian in market value in market value vanished, and investors lost everything, and there really was no justice. I've put there, and no one was charged. I mean, no one was found guilty. So let's get into it. Again, it's the junior mining sector. One of my sources has the thesis that it's because of Bre-X that the junior mining sector in Calgary Stock Exchange basically collapsed for a while there. But it's interesting that part of the background of this around that time, there was a lot of enthusiasm in junior mining stuff because there had been various very lucrative things found in different places. Diamond Fields, it was a nickel discovery in Fosse Bay. Arguipa resources in Peru. They are both acquired by major mining firms. It's not mentioned here. There's also very close to the infamous Bre-X Busang site, I think like 70 miles or kilometers, anyways, very close, was a very successful gold mine owned by Rio Tinto. Anyways, so there was a lot of rags to riches takeovers and stories and whatever, penny stocks to blue chip stock stories happening at the time in the early 90s, even the late 80s, early 90s. So speculative frenzy led to many other junior companies, but often with no proven reserves, to secure exploration rights in hopes of finding the next big strike. And Bre-X hype further intensified this momentum. They were part of the massive bandwagon effect of people speculating on mines. Now, this is my messiest looking slide because I kept reworking it and looking for proper citations, and I guess, I mean, it's worth mentioning, like, what are we, like 30 years later now? So some things have kind of been lost to time. They say the internet is forever, but yeah, but not forever on the first page of search results, that's for darn sure. So with these two, with Michael de Guzman and David Walsh, and again, this wasn't the focus, what I was supposed to be working on, but I want to know some biographical information about these guys. I think that's reasonable. And I'll digress for a second here, kind of, it's on the same topic, and say, just to get my head around the topic, I had looked at this Masterminds. I used to love that show back in the day about all the crooks and frauds out there. And I rewatched. I don't know if I saw it back in the day, but anyways, I watched it, and some of the narrative, in fact, a lot of the narrative, after doing about a week's worth of research in the past 3 days, I realized this is wrong. A lot of the stuff in this Masterminds episode is just simply wrong. One of the things presented by these so-called experts here, and I meant to look up who these guys are, but never mind, is that, well, more or less, Filipinos, they have a hard time breaking into the higher level roles and whatnot, like kind of citing racism or something as something that was affecting the Guzman. I have no idea if there's any evidence for that. And that Masterminds thing makes it seem as though de Guzman was the mastermind who kind of then recruited Felderhoff and Walsh. That's completely the opposite way around. That's not how that went. David Walsh incorporated the company, then took on Felderhoff, and then de Guzman. But de Guzman and Felderhoff had worked together before. Anyways, I'm falling down the rabbit hole of the history and the backstory, and it just turned into a big mess here on this slide, so I kind of gave up. But if you care, there's some biographical background data on these guys. But I think something that I at least made sure to bold that I believe is really important. Before Bre-X, Vice President John Felderhoff's claim to fame was his co-discovery of the massive OKTD copper mine in Papua New Guinea in the late 1960s. That's going a ways back. And why I bold that? Let's understand that Felderhoff was a geologist and actually an experienced one. Okay, and that's not something that Masterminds thing. Anyways, never mind Masterminds. Thought it was a good show. So the thing is, it is much debated amongst actual academic geologists, and well, they're not just academics. They have a big role to play in this massive industry of mining and junior mining. But they debate whether the theories behind Guzman and probably Felderhoff picking the site made sense. It seemed like there should have been gold there. And in fact, right up until his death, Felderhoff seemed to believe, no, there is gold there, we just didn't find it. I don't know. So it's a rabbit hole I kind of fell down, is looking at the geology and everything. Okay, but you guys get it. There's a very high level of expertise required in order to verify the sorts of claims that are being made by these prospectors and things like that. And, spoiler, proper controls in that regard were not in place. So, the FOMO factor. All right, now getting towards the actual story here. Whether it was Walsh or Felderhoff or de Guzman or all three or two of them, they had this site, they had prospecting or exploratory rights that they got from the Indonesian hideously corrupt, according to the guy in Masterminds and according to every other source, the hideously corrupt Indonesian government had granted the Bre-X boys exploratory rights, and they were about to run out. And you guys don't find anything, then you're done as of December 18th, 1993. To maintain their rights, they needed to demonstrate exploratory drilling test holes before the deadline that were promising. Geologists Felderhoff and de Guzman were under pressure to produce promising results within this time frame. As the deadline approached, the initial drilling had still yet not given any promising results. This is reported in several places that de Guzman had a dream, and the dream told them where to look and drill, and then they went there and then they found the gold. And then they found promising core samples. And that allowed Bre-X to retain its prospecting rights at the sites, Busang 1 in Indonesia. And now the stage is set. Oh, but it isn't. Let's go back in time. I couldn't help but include this because, I love Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. One plan of acquiring sudden wealth was to salt a wildcat claim and sell out while the excitement was up. The process was simple. The schemer located a worthless ledge, sunk a shaft on it, bought a wagon load of rich Comstock ore, dumped a portion of it into the shaft, and piled the rest up above ground. Then he showed the property to a simpleton and sold it to him at a high figure. And not to disrespect all the poor investors and everybody else that was taken in by the Bre-X scandal, that's basically what happened. This old-timey scam, just in a new way. Barely in a new way. Well, no, now you actually have to drill for core samples, and there's a process. You drill your core samples, you cut it in half, you send half away to get assessed for how much gold there appears to be in there, and you keep the other half for records and verification purposes. Well, they didn't do that. De Guzman didn't do that. De Guzman ground up like 90 to 100% of them, so that according to masterminds, and I'm not seeing this in other sources, he took his gold wedding ring, and shaved pieces of it off and mixed it in with the ground up core samples. Anyways, what's more likely is he did something similar to what Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, mentioned. He just got some gold from somewhere. In fact, I think where de Guzman got the gold that he used to salt the core samples was from just it's alluvial gold that you find when you're panning in rivers. There's all kinds of people all over Indonesia and Borneo panning for gold, so they'll get gold flakes and stuff. The Guzman would buy those, mix them in with the core samples, send them off to be assayed, or to be analyzed, assayed, yeah. By who? By who? Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. And it was like, oh my God, these core samples and the percentage of gold in them, this is indicative of crazy madness. Of what were the numbers? Like, the people, even Felderhoff thought it was indicative of at least 200 million tons of gold. Should have the number in my head. Sure, I've got it somewhere here. Here's the supposedly hideous, corrupt, well, he probably was, Suharto, president of Indonesia. And he may be notoriously corrupt, but his actions were instrumental in uncovering the Bre-X fraud. In early 1997, we're skipping a lot of years here, but I'll come back to, well, I mean, maybe I should have had these slides in slightly different order. In 1996, Bre-X was at the kind of height of its hype. All of these, fraudulent salted core samples, just driving massive investor hype and everything. Around that time, de Guzman, Felderhoff, and I believe also Walsh sold off some of their shares in their own company. And they were at that time worth something like $200 or $300. And, to an outsider looking in, hey, these guys, they've been struggling as miners all these years. This is the mastermind's narrative, and this isn't true because it doesn't jibe with Felderhoff having previous. Anyways, but whatever, everybody's entitled to cash out a little bit. You got some success. It's really hard trekking through the malaria-riddled jungles of Malaysia or whatever, Indonesia. Anyways, so they were cashing out a little bit in 1996, and again, to come back to material misstatements and just lying about your financial statements, but also including something very similar, press statements, or even just giving speeches. There was this this happens every year, annual Prospectors and Developers Convention in March 1996. That picture's from this year's convention, but this quote that I found about de Guzman really kind of being a lousy public speaker, but he gave a speech at that prospectors conference, and he talked about the impressive grades coming out of the site and the potential for an even higher recovery rate, or of the potential for a high recovery rate of gold. Okay, the resource calculation there, he said, referring to something he had up on the PowerPoint or whatever behind him, slide presentation. The calculation shows our internal estimate against drill-based calculations by Kilbourne, right? And Kilbourne, a subsidiary of SNC-Lavalin, that's who's been analyzing their stuff. Anyways, had been retained by Bre-X. Presentations such as this one led investors and analysts to believe that the company was independently auditing Bre-X results. That SNC-Lavalin's subsidiary Kilbourne was independently auditing the results. The Kilbourne The Kilbourne figures come up to be this time better than we were, says Guzman, referring to one set of figures. Looks like I'm sleeping on this a bit, ha ha ha, and everybody starts laughing because everybody's being swept up away in the hype and the gold fever, right? But anyways, look, so that was, 1996. The Guzman's hamming it up. He's helping to drive the hype. Walsh also, you know, pumping out press releases. Felderhoff, all three of them were guilty, right? But that's the thing. What was really happening was the Guzman was falsifying the core samples, and then just sharing his data with Kilbourne. And then Kilbourne was saying, yeah, your numbers look good. They weren't actually analyzing the samples. That's so crooked. Okay. So this slide should have been next here. In early 1997, Suharto ruled that a small little company like Bre-X cannot solely run a site of this magnitude. And I'm sure in that time between, 93 to 96, 97, like, this is a massive political corruption historical rabbit hole with Suharto, but all of his, it was a crony run type of thing, nepotism, cronyism, whatever, where like I think his daughter was in charge of mines, and like one of his sons was in charge of infrastructure. And so Bre-X, obviously, probably along with all the other mining with Rio Tinto and everybody else, had to kind of pay to play and get all tangled up with the corrupt Suharto regime. But, for whatever reason, Suharto was like, anyways, this mine is so productive and crazy, or has so much potential. You need to take somebody else on. You need help. You need a bigger mining company. So in the end of February 1997, Bre-X ended up entering into a joint venture agreement, not with Barrick, that's a whole other thing, but with Freeport, in an arrangement that was more profitable. And again, there's politics and cronyism and stuff here, and corruption. Was more profitable for the interests of the regime. Okay. So it was Freeport McMoran, an American company that partnered up with Bre-X, and then you get your first true audit analysis of the core samples. As part of its due diligence program, Freeport drilled several twin holes. More details about what a twin hole is in the bottom corner there. I'm not going to read that, but they drilled more holes. Also at the Buzang 2 site, which the Bre-X had also acquired. And they were getting negative results. It was like, well, there's no gold here, or very little. Right? Nothing like what was driving the hype. Now begins the downfall. And, I mean, it's worth mentioning, then these results started coming out, and the Freeport McMoran, this American company, are like, hey, Guzman, come back. We need to talk to you. I'm not sure if the narrative goes that the Guzman was actually at this convention while that was happening, or what. Probably not. But anyways, Guzman was somewhere. And like, yo, you need to come back. We need to talk to you about your results versus our results. Bre-X agreed to conduct confirmation drilling programs as suggested by Freeport. Strathcona Mineral Services was retained by Bre-X, but they also did a proper job, and they were also coming up negative. So I guess that's when de Guzman was called back. Either way, he went out drinking the night before, did some karaoke. He sang I Did It My Way, de Guzman. Next morning, gets on a helicopter to head back to the site and deal with the Strathcona and or Freeport people. I can't remember which, but he's supposed to come back. Helicopter stops to drop another guy off. They continue on. Pilot looks back. Guzman's gone. Jumped out of the helicopter, supposedly. There's no footage of any of this. That's the story. It took the Indonesian police days and days and days to find his body. It was so badly decomposed that you couldn't really identify him, and they just went ahead and let's just go ahead and cremate him, and that was that. On March 1997, the Toronto Stock Exchange, again, when did they even get listed on the TSE and the Vancouver Stock Exchanges? I kind of skipped that. That would have been somewhere like 94, 95, 96. Now, actually, it probably would have been 96. Like, 96 was the big turning point in booming for these guys and not getting caught, and then 97 was the downfall, right? Anyways, so TSE trading halted after de Guzman had fallen to his death from a helicopter when he was returning to Busan to investigate, why Freeport was getting the negative results. Bre-X issued a press release on May 4th, 1997, confirming Strathcona's negative results, so now this is months after the death. All in the fall of 1997, no, the spring of 1997, when he fell from the helicopter anyways. So a gold deposit, the Bre-X Busan 1 and 2 sites, that had been reported as being worth as much as $44 billion was actually worthless. Again, I'm getting a lot of my stuff from the court case that went on and on of the Ontario Securities Commission versus Felderhoff, but we'll get into that in a second. So we'll get into that now. The only man charged but acquitted, Felderhoff, who, like I said, him and the other guys around 1996 were selling off their stocks. Felderhoff sold 84 million in stock while the gold estimates were rapidly inflating. There were red flags about sample tampering, which, come on, he must have known. He was a successful, highly trained geologist. Anyways, internally concerns were growing among some insiders about the legitimacy of the deposit. Yeah, and I'm sure it wasn't like only when Freeport, McMahon, and Strathcona started verifying things, then, who could have thunk it? Come on. There was definitely willful blindness going on. The dismissal of 2 civil lawsuits, I should have put this on the other side. Bre-X geologist Felderhoff, the defunct company's top man in Indonesia, was found not guilty of insider trading by an Ontario court in 2007. Wow, we're sure skipping a lot of years. Yeah. Think how the victims felt. Like 10 years after the revelations. And then yet another 7 years after that, 2 civil litigation suits just fell apart because here's the thing. This is a nice little trick. Go bankrupt and then you don't have to pay anything to anybody. Oh, we can't afford it. Anyways, body badly decomposed. I already explained this. After faxing a memo off to Felderhoff, he went out boozing, karaoke. I explained that already. So in case you thought I was making that up, no, that's a thing that happened. The night before his alleged death, de Guzman went out partying and everything. Many years later, in 2019, Felderhoff died he was back in the Philippines, back in Asia anyways. I believe he had been living on the Cayman Islands for a while right after the scandal broke, non-extradition treaty, yada, 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 suffering from health problems anyways. And somebody I didn't talk about much in all this is David Walsh, right? Born in Quebec, by the way. Not that that's relevant, but, he withdrew to the Bahamas when the company began to unravel. He denied any part in the fraud. I don't know if I put it here where I put it, but actually he did cooperate as soon as things started to come out, as if he didn't know about them. But as soon as things started to come out, he did cooperate with the RCMP and yada, yada, yada. So he was never really implicated, even though, I don't know if that's true, because he was making false press releases, though. So anyways, let me just take a sip of root beer here. The most notable reform, at least there was some reform, so hopefully this sort of thing doesn't happen again. Something called National Instrument 43101. And I'm just going to summarize. Basically, you have to actually get a qualified person, a professional geoscientist or engineer with relevant experience and credentials to verify your results, to actually, do tests and assays and stuff in a impartial, non-conflict of interest kind of It's mandated that detailed disclosure requirements, including comprehensive geological data, resources, estimates, and reserves, be kept, be shared. Like this whole nonsense about letting the prospectors themselves do the analysis and hold on to the what might be evidence. No more of that. All of the common sense stuff that should have been in place around mining, 43101, if I'm understanding it correctly, makes it required. A critical component is a requirement for independent verification of mineral reserves and resources, ensuring that external experts assess the validity of these claims. Like, it's just crazy because how many of the cases and stories and things that me and the other students in this fraud program have looked into, like Enron, for example. It's like, really? There wasn't anything on the books to prevent insiders from doing the job of people that should really be outsiders, kind of thing, you know? There's just so much conflict of interest that has been allowed to happen, and I'm sure still is allowed. Anyways, across various industries and sectors, and even if you get stuff like this National Instrument 43-101 on the books, is it observed? Stock exchanges worldwide, including the TSX and the Australian Securities Exchange, introduced stricter listing requirements for mining companies. You know, I can't help but digress, because, you know, I play the penny stocks, especially uranium and rare earth. And, you know, I check in after a couple months the other day, and it's like, oh, why has that one been delisted? Why was that delisted? Why was this uranium thing delisted? Why are they... If they were delisted, you gotta kind of wonder why they were listed in the first place. But anyways, I digress. What about justice? It was really galling to read this Vancouver Sun article in 2013 saying, that's it, it's all wrapped up, it's all done. Felderhoff was acquitted. And it's not going anywhere because, yeah, the litigation dragged on for 16 years, which wore down the funds and resources of the litigants to the point where they had to give up, and the defendants had just blown so much money, and the whole bankruptcy, you know, their trustee was Deloitte, and that sucked them dry. And then you want to criticize Deloitte, but you know, it's so... This is something that I don't see is really changing. In fact, I just heard about the Johnson & Johnson scandal, where it turned out, funnily enough, kind of sort of related to this, because it's also about mining. But whereas the Bre-X boys lied about what was there, right, lied to say that there was something there that wasn't, Johnson & Johnson lied about what is there, and he said it wasn't there. That was very ineloquently put, but what I'm saying is that it turns out, and geologists know this, I'm sure, where you find talc, you're often going to find asbestos. And it turns out for decades, bottles of Johnson & Johnson baby powder have been tainted with asbestos just by virtue of geological facts. And that's a whole other thing. And there's definitely civil litigation, and there was some settlement or something, and tons of women with ovarian cancer, and it's a mess. But you know, one of the things that Johnson & Johnson did? They started like a kind of shell company subsidiary thing and put all the onus on that, knowing full well that it would get litigated into oblivion and it could declare bankruptcy. And that's cool. Doesn't really hurt Johnson & Johnson because we set up I don't know what you call that, a scapegoat shell company. It's despicable that sort of thing can happen, that you can play the game and game the system, especially when it comes to how litigation plays out in this country. Anyways, I digress. Oh, there's some of the stuff on that side of the screen about Deloitte, the bankruptcy trustee. Of the $6.1 billion once attributed to Bre-X market value, only $79,000 remains in the company accounts as of 2013. It's like, what? They don't have anything to pay anybody what they owe them. Deloitte was paid $3.9 million in fees, and lawyers earned $8 million, but investors saw almost nothing. The victim investors. Well, anyways, caveat emptor, buyer beware, I guess. I think we're about to finish here. I've been talking for quite some time, haven't I? Fear of missing out is a problem in relation to the bandwagon effect, but also the fear of missing out that caused de Guzman and Felderhoff and Walsh to do what they did. Mainly de Guzman, I don't know. That's what I mean about that masterminds thing, putting all the onus on de Guzman for being greedy and coming up with a scheme and saying, hey, that looks like a place where I could make it look like there might be gold. Yeah, I don't buy that narrative, right? Like, I think maybe some of them really did believe there must have been gold around there somewhere, and they were afraid of missing out on the rush that was part of other parts of Indonesia and Busang, Borneo. Anyways, there's the problem of fake it till you make it. You see this, I think this is the underlying issue with a lot of fraud and a lot of even just negligence and whatnot, and a lot of cutting corners and failing to implement proper controls and whatnot in companies big and small. If we just, it's kind of similar to the lapping thing. Like, let's just steal this little bit of money and keep it, but then the next time we get some, we'll put it in, and then, because eventually things will get better, and then we'll be okay, and then we'll be successful, and it'll all come out in the wash. Fake it till you make it. We'll just falsify another core sample. Don't worry, because then eventually we're gonna find something, right? We got to. I think Felderhoff, right up until his death, had that notion in his head about the Busang sites. There's something there. He died in the Philippines. Yeah, anyways. Gambler's fallacy. Well, I guess that's more about the investor. No, why did I put that there? Gambler's fallacy and sunk cost fallacy are very similar things. I guess like the last stuff I was just explaining about, look, we just need to go a little bit further. We just need to do what we need to do in order to continue our going concern such that we can finally... You keep doing stuff like that, and you're digging yourself like kind of conceptually and ethically deeper and deeper into a hole, such that you psychologically become like target fixated and you just can't stop. So that's not quite the same as the gambler's fallacy, but it's definitely something that gamblers suffer from. Anyways, and pseudo-independent confirmation, and this opens up the whole can of worms of how hard I found it to do research. There's stuff on Wikipedia that's flat out wrong, or I can't find any citations for. That masterminds thing where they paint de Guzman as the bad guy. This weird incoherent narrative, like he was only doing it because there's discrimination against Filipinos like him. But then you guys paint him like he's the mastermind main villain, which I don't think he couldn't have been. So anyways, but pseudo-independent confirmation is, well, so-and-so says this, and so-and-so says that, and these other guys say the same thing, so it's probably true. Usually applies to, like, well, all these different news outlets are reporting the same thing, so it's probably true, it must be. Kilborn, right? SNC-Lavalin's, subsidiary Kilborn, well, they're confirming de Guzman's findings. So it's probably true. No, they weren't. They were reporting Guzman's findings as if they were verifying them, but they weren't. It's a type of pseudo-independent confirmation. And that's why you need to have external parties come in and do it proper. Anyways, well, I'm carrying on now. Jeez. Past half an hour. If anybody knows any way that I can cover rent and living expenses while I continue to do something that I'd love to do, is fall down the rabbit hole and find out more about Kilborn, i.e. SNC-Lavalin's role in all of this, because it's like gone down the memory hole. It's hard to find information about that, not just on Google. I mean, my research skills go far beyond just using Google and Wikipedia. You can rest assured of that. And it's been deep sixed. It's been vanished. It's been scrubbed. It's been, stolen with Photoshop, Anyways, well, I better leave it there. So, as is so often the case, the more you find out, the more you realize you don't know. And the more questions you try to answer, the more questions come up. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.